So, okay, I hear this. So hello everyone, welcome to LFS ACE Team's event, Is Grad School Right For You? My name is Steven. I'm really honored to welcome everyone as the host for today's event. We have one facilitator throughout the event, Michelle, who will be monitoring the chat and answering questions. Oh, I forgot to share my slides, wait. Oh no. Yes. Okay. Okay. I'll go for the next. So before we start with the actual event, I also like to go for a land acknowledgement. So I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that UBC's Vancouver Point Grey campus is suited on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. I also know how many of you might be joining from various places, both near and far. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owner and caretaker of these lands. So for those of you who might not be familiar yet with what the ACE team does, we're a group of LFS students focused on delivering programming related to career development and related to academic success. And yeah, here's an agenda for today's event. We'll start by learning some more on how to apply for grad school from our guest speaker, Danielle. Then we'll welcome the panelists. This is followed by a Q&A session where you can ask questions about grad school. I encourage everyone to ask questions because other students might have the same ones. And then we'll finish up with a closing remark. Now, enough talk from me. I'll be welcoming Danielle, who's a career professional development educator at the Center of Student Involvement and Careers, to share us her insight on applying to grad school. I'll stop sharing now and have Danielle share her slides.
Thank you so much, Stephen, and welcome everyone. Thank you for being here today. So my name is Danielle. I work at the Center for Student Involvement Careers as a career educator there. I kind of have two areas of focus. One is supporting our current UBC master's and PhD students, so the folks who are already in graduate school. And then the other sort of half of my portfolio is supporting people who are thinking about going to grad school, exploring their options and trying to figure out whether it's a good fit for them. I did have a chance to look at the Google Docs. So some of the questions that were shared there, they're all great questions. I'll probably cover some of them in this presentation, but we will have a bit of time afterwards for me to answer any additional questions. And I'm also, before I dive in, going to put my email in the chat just so you have it. If after today you have any other questions about grad school applications, you're always welcome to email me and we can direct you to some services and some information through the center. So a really important thing when thinking about grad program and thinking about whether grad school is right for you is understanding the different types of graduate programs that exist. I know there were a few questions about this in the Google Docs, so I always think that this is a really important thing to spend some time on. So I generally tend to think that there's kind of three broad categories of graduate programs. Not everything will fit perfectly into one category, but most programs you're going to come across are going to belong in one of these categories. So the first is what I'm going to call research programs. If something is advertised as a Master of Science or certainly a PhD program, probably what it means is that it's a research program in which your goal as a graduate student would be to make some sort of new contribution to knowledge. And that can seem kind of weighty, but it means you would be working on some sort of original research project that is trying to answer a question or solve a problem in your discipline. Now, of course, what that question or problem is will sound really different depending on the academic discipline you're working in. Another way you can usually know if something is going to be a research program is if it sounds like a subject that you could have majored in as an undergraduate. So if it's a Master of Soil Science or it is a Master of Geography, often you will see that sort of continuity between the undergraduate academic program and the research program. These are the programs that often, but not always at the master's level, involve doing a thesis. So there may be that sort of long project. Certainly at the PhD level, there will be, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But yeah, these programs are often distinguished by focus on creating new knowledge in an academic discipline, often a research project or thesis. These are also the programs where you are most likely going to have a supervisor, so a professor who works closely with you on that research project. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. The other thing that's really important that I just want to acknowledge about these programs is that they are not explicitly training for a career path in the way that some of them are. You're certainly going to gain skills and knowledge that you could apply to a number of career paths. Happy to talk about that if you'd like to, but they are not specifically preparing you for a specific job title. So just something to kind of think about. Professional programs, that's actually a nice contrast. I put up two of kind of the textbook examples: medicine, pharmacy, depending on academic programs. You would also think about law or kinesiology, counseling, psychology. Any of the programs where in order to work in that field, you would need to be licensed in some ways, right? It makes perfect sense. If you're doing some sorts of work that do have a high ethical requirement and a high skill requirement, you need to have gone through a very specific form of training. So these programs are often quite different in that you're not writing a thesis. You usually don't work with a supervisor in the same way. You take an assortment of courses and hands-on learning to move you towards that goal. And typically when you get to the end of that program, you are then qualified and able to be a registered practitioner of whatever job field. So they are very explicitly training you to eventually work in that field. And then the third category that I tend to kind of think of are what I might call course-based or professional masters. So I put up a few examples here of ones from the LFS faculty, knowing you might have heard of these or be interested in these. So these are master's programs that I see as sort of somewhere in the middle. I'll take the Master of Food Science as an example. It is more geared towards teaching you skills that you might use in a particular type of work rather than doing an original research project. You typically wouldn't do a thesis in these programs, and you also typically wouldn't work with a supervisor in the same way. Often you're taking a series of courses and maybe doing something like a practicum or an internship, and it is giving you skills that are tied to a specific type of work. So if we take the Master of Food Science, lots of folks in that program then maybe go on to work in quality assurance or QA roles. They're getting training that's very relevant to that, but it's not sort of accredited in the same way that someone who wants to practice as a doctor has to go to med school. I hope that's sort of clear. I'm happy to take some more questions about that. This table, and I'll send around these slides after the presentation if anyone wants to take a closer look at or has more questions on them. But just some other things about these three different categories. If someone is hoping to pursue a PhD, in most cases, in a Canadian context, most people are going to do a master's first and then move on to do a PhD. That's different in the US and some other places in the world, but typically in Canada, you'll hear most people starting with a master's and then progressing on to a PhD. There sometimes is an option for what's called a direct entry PhD, where you would go straight in, but that doesn't tend to be the majority of the cases. So most of the time, people are going to start with that master's degree and move from there into the PhD. If someone is thinking about going the PhD route, it will typically be that research master's that's going to be kind of the stepping stone towards that. As you can see, sorry, I got confused myself here. A couple other things I want to say about the differences between these programs, and then we'll talk about masters and PhDs. Some things you should know as well are differences in funding. So often as someone is doing a research-based master's, there will actually be an opportunity to get paid to go to grad school. How much you get paid will depend on the program and the package you're offered, but you might be given the opportunity to do things like be a teaching assistant or a research assistant, or offered sort of a funding package. So that can be useful to know about a research-based program. If you're looking at the more professional-based programs, that is less likely to be the case. Those are often sort of seen as you're investing in your future career and your future earning potential. Not that you can never get any funding, but that's typically going to be less of the equation. Another thing that's useful to just know is research-based programs can be a lot more variable in their length. If you're doing a thesis, it might take you longer or shorter to get done with that thesis. Some of our panelists might speak about that, whereas a professional program, there's often pretty structured when you would be done. This is where I started to rush into the difference between some of these levels of graduate programs. These are, generalizations. People will have very different experiences depending on their program and what they end up doing. But most people will start with the master's and progress on to the PhD. Some of the differences, as you move into the PhD, if you go that route, you will definitely be pursuing an independent research project, and that will be probably the majority of what you spend your time on. You will definitely be working with a supervisor, and the PhD can be somewhat lengthy. Usually you can find statistics. So I know UBC offers statistics about if someone is doing their PhD in soil science, you can actually look and see it's taken someone on average 5.72 years to complete that. But typically you're looking somewhere in the 4 to 7 year range. The master's programs are usually a little bit shorter, anywhere from 1 to 3. What else did I want to say about that? There were a couple questions about kind of, does having a dual degree affect your application, or is it necessary to have been in an honors program to get into a master's program? I think that's going to depend on the program. So one of the things that's a little bit challenging about grad school is they're not standardized. One master's program can ask for one thing, another similar master's program can ask for another thing, and a third master's program at a different school can ask for something else. So you will kind of need to look individually at each program you're considering to see what requirements. They might require an honors program, they might not. And as far as a dual degree, I don't see that necessarily having an impact on most programs as long as you're meeting the prerequisites. So certainly some programs will say we need you to have done a course in this and a course in that. As long as you meet those courses, I think you're in a good position to consider applying. What you could do if you've done a dual degree is kind of think about in things like your personal statement or your resume, can you show that that dual degree is added value? Is there something about having done that dual degree that might make you a stronger grad student? And maybe you can actually sort of use that to your advantage. But I think as long as you're meeting those prerequisites and those requirements, should be fair game to consider those programs. I wanted to speak about like how you figure out which program is a good idea and whether any of this is a good idea. So a few thoughts on that. Where I would usually start is if you're thinking about pursuing a particular type of work, figuring out what the relationship between that graduate degree and that type of work is. You can do this in a couple ways. You can talk to people who work in that field. You can look at people's LinkedIn profiles to see, the type of backgrounds they've had. You could look at something like a professional association website to see if there's any educational requirements that they share. And I think the question you're trying to figure out is a graduate degree necessary? What you might find out is that it's helpful and that most people who work in that field have graduate training, or, I'll go back to the medicine example, that it's absolutely required. Or you might find out that employers are interested in hiring people with specific skills and that a graduate degree is one way to get those skills. And then that would allow you to have that information to think about, is it necessary? Is it one path I can consider? Does this make sense for me to be doing it? The other thing I think it's really helpful, and this is tied back to knowing kind of what you want from the grad school experience, is what is it important for you to gain during your time in grad school? Do you really want to meet professionals working in a particular field? Do you want to make sure you're getting that practicum or that internship or that hands-on experience? Do you love a particular research topic and you really want to get a chance to do a project related to that research question? Knowing a little bit about what you want from the grad school experience, I think will help you to identify the sort of program that's the best fit, and then also maybe even choose between different programs if you're applying different places. And then, I think the panelists will probably speak to that, or I think you'll get some questions around that a little bit later, but also reflecting on like, what is it that you hope the grad school experience will be like? What are you hoping it will offer you? And looking to maybe speak to some current grad students or people who have gone through that program to say, you know what, if this is what's really important to me, is that something you had during your time as a grad school? Is that the only way to get this thing that I'm looking for? I know that sometimes it can seem like grad school is the kind of obvious path coming out of an undergraduate degree. And of course, there's many good reasons to do it, but it's definitely also worth exploring and being clear with yourself. What is it that I hope this will give me? Are there other ways I could get it? Do I want to weigh out those different options? And I'll just pause and quickly say, I also don't think panelists might want to speak to this as well. I don't think it's, in most cases, strictly necessary to do a graduate degree right after you finish your undergrad. There can be a lot of, pros and cons to when you do it, but I know many successful graduate students who finished their undergrad, worked or traveled or did other things, and then came back to start that master's or start that professional program and are having a great experience. So even if you do think grad school is definitely right for you, another question I would ask is it right for you right now? Or are there other timelines you might want to consider? Yeah, I think that was most of the content that I wanted to run through. When I send around the slides, you'll see that there are some additional pieces in there about like the statement of intent and the application process. I'm also happy to like speak to that later on, but I wanted to make sure we focused on that. What type of programs are out there and how do I know what's right for me? I'm going to stop sharing for a second here. Looks like we have a few more minutes. Are there any questions that I didn't get to that people are hoping I'll speak to? If you want to put them in the chat, I'm happy to speak to those. And I'm also just going to take a quick look at the Google Doc to see. We talked about difference between a master's and a PhD, research and professional. Oh, the piece about a supervisor. So first step is figuring out if you need a supervisor. As I mentioned, for many research-based programs, you will, but not for every program. And then the second step is if you do need a supervisor, when do you need to find them? And confusingly, programs are different about that. Some programs want you to have a supervisor when you apply. So they'll ask you on the application, like, is there a professor who has said, yes, I'm willing to supervise them? Other programs, it's like we get you into the program, then in your first year, we figure that out. So it's still a good idea to know who a potential supervisor might be, but you may not have to do that work right up front of finding a supervisor. So usually most programs will explain that on their website, or you can send an email and ask. If you are in that position where you need to find a supervisor as part of the application process, I would spend some time on the department website. Most professors will sort of list their research interests, so you can look for someone who's interested in similar topics. If you were thinking of staying at UBC, you might think about profs you've already had a class with. If you're thinking of going somewhere else, say you really want to go to University of Toronto, talk to some profs here and see if they know people that they could recommend. Academia is a pretty small world, especially within disciplines. They will probably know professors teaching at other schools, and they might be able to say, so-and-so at University of Ottawa does great work. They might be a good supervisor for you to consider. Seeing a couple questions starting to pop up in the chat here. Okay, great question about applying to more than one school and backups. So most people do apply to more than one grad school. I would say, just from the students I talk to, the average seems to be kind of like 3 to 4 is where most people apply. That said, there are people who apply to way more than that. And I've definitely talked to students who are like, there's really only one school that matches my interests, or I need to be in this city. There's only one university in that city. I'm only applying to one school. So how many schools you apply to is really up to you and maybe your degree of flexibility and just how many schools you're interested in. I would say, there is some value in giving yourself a couple options, which I think is where the like 3 or 4 might come from. I would try to limit yourself to not applying to like 15, because at some point I think you're going to be A, exhausted, and B, the quality of your applications might start to decrease if you're spreading yourself a bit too thin. So I think kind of finding that happy medium of where are the number of schools I'm actually interested in, I would be happy to go there, but I'm going to give myself a few options because it won't be sort of guaranteed where you'll get accepted to. Any other questions? Great questions about recommendation letters and grad school after working for a long time. So, and you know, I'd be curious, like long time can mean different things to different people. So a couple of thoughts on this. If, for example, you know you're probably going to work for a while and then plan to go to grad school, I would try to be proactive about maybe keeping in touch with some professors during that time that you're working. It doesn't mean you have to be best friends, but even if you email them once or twice a year to say, oh, I saw you got a new article published. Are you still teaching this course? I started this new job, or I started this new internship. Even just a little bit of information, keeping in touch maybe like once or twice a year, means that if in 3 years you're ready to apply to a master's program, it's not like the first time they've talked to you in that window of time. The other thing I would be proactive about doing, if you know you plan to apply to grad school maybe down the road, keep your assignments, keep your course papers, keep any copies of anything related to that class. So if in 2023, you decided you're going to get back in touch with a professor, you could really easily say, in fall 2020, I did this assignment for your class. Here it is if you'd like to refer to a copy of it. And that can be really helpful when they're writing you a reference letter. So it's pretty normal, and it's totally okay that you might be asking for reference letters after having been out of school for a while. But I think some things you can do to make that easier are kind of keeping in touch with professors and just keeping good records of what you did during your time as a student, if you think you might need them in the future. Is it doable to apply to both law school and one other professional master's program? Should I choose one and focus on it? I think that depends on how much else you have on your plate, like what's going on with your courses, other things happening in your life. You know, this fall might also be different given the pandemic situation. I've talked with some students who are like, I'm applying to fewer schools than I thought I was going to apply to a year ago, because given the demands on my time, that just makes more sense. So I think it's going to be an individual decision. And I think the other thing I would consider is, you know, would that professional master's program, like, is that something you're genuinely interested in? Would that be a program that you truly believe you'd be excited about and would be kind of bringing value? You know, there might be standardized, for law school, there's certainly standardized tests to consider. There might be for some other programs as well. So I would take a good look at what the application requirements are, what else is on your plate in the coming months, and even the deadlines, right? If one program's deadline is December 1st and then the next is not till March 1st, that gives you more flexibility about, okay, maybe I can apply to both because I can wrap one up and then think about the next. If they're both due on December 15th, that's going to be a bit more challenging to manage. And I think it comes back to that question of like, you want to give yourself options, but if you're actually sending off applications that are not as strong as you'd like them to be, you're not doing yourself a service by applying to more things. So those are some of the things you might reflect on. Would a graduate education affect how an employer evaluates my application resume? Yes, definitely. So, you know, if we look at some job postings, there will be some job postings that will say like, it is required that you have a master's degree to apply to that job. And in that case, whether or not you have that master's degree might mean like, are you even considered for that job? There are also jobs that will say like master's degree preferred. So, okay, it's not strictly a requirement, but having that experience will potentially, again, significantly move you forward in the application. It might be the case that they're not saying we're looking for someone with a master's degree, but we're looking for someone with experience doing these 3 things. If as part of your master's thesis, you've done those 3 things, you're now also a more competitive candidate because you can show them that you've done those things. So it can play out in different ways, ranging from like, we require it, we would like it, oh, we didn't even know we wanted it, but that is helpful. So there's lots of ways you can use it to improve an application. I do just want to be really honest, less so at the master's degree, sometimes at the PhD degree. There can sometimes be employers where if they're not looking to hire someone with a graduate degree and someone does have a graduate degree, they might have questions about that. And that's not to say that you could never get one of those jobs, but they might want to know, why does someone who has a PhD applying to a job that doesn't require one? Are you actually going to be happy in this job, or are you going to, want to go off and do something else? So there can be some cases where you're going to have to be able to talk about like why you're interested in this job. And there might be a couple employers where are just like, oh, that's not something we typically see on a resume. What does that mean? So something to consider. If you apply to grad schools, I'm going to take, I guess, these last 1 or 2 questions here. Would your grades from your last year of undergrad not be considered? So this often happens, like if a program has a December 1st deadline, they're not seeing your final year's courses. What will usually happen is they won't see those, so the previous grades will be weighted more heavily. If they make you an offer, that offer will typically be contingent on you maintaining those grades. So probably in March or April, you'll have to submit something saying, here are the grades I got for my final year. And they will often expect those grades to be comparable to what they've already seen. So it might not be factored into the admissions decision as much, but usually it doesn't mean you can then unfortunately take the year off. They're usually going to expect that those grades will be similar. And they may even say, we're letting you in contingent on maintaining these type of grades in your final year. And I'll just speak quickly to this last certificate program. Yeah, so that's a great point. There are things like certificates or diplomas or even like skill upgrading boot camp type of programs, you often like with a focus on coding or data analysis, where the goal is really, I think, to teach you a specific skill set in a fairly compressed amount of time. And that can be really helpful either for someone who is already working but wants some additional skills to kind of be able to have different opportunities available, or if you know that there's a job you want that requires some skills that you may not have got the chance to learn in undergrad, because undergrad courses are often a little bit less specialized. So those can definitely be a good choice, but I would want to be clear, what skills are you getting from that? Are those skills that align with the job you would want to do? And maybe even talking to some people, some employers or some professionals. Do they know about this program? Is this something they would value if they saw it on a resume? And that might help you to understand whether that's a good fit. I want to make sure we don't take time away from the panelists, so I'm happy to answer more questions later or by email, but is now a good time to change over?
Yes, thank you, Danielle, for sharing this valuable information, and thank you all for your great questions. If you continue to have more, feel free to just ask them in the chat and we'll forward them to Danielle later on. I'll share my slides. Okay, I may not mute. Okay, I'm not muted. Okay. So next up, Next up, I'd like to welcome our panelists, Nadia, Cheryl, and Jenny. Would you mind quickly introducing yourselves? How about we start with Nadia?
Sure, no problem. Hey everyone, my name is Nadia, as you were just told. I got my Bachelor's of Science in the Applied Animal Biology program here at UBC. I'm currently doing my Master's of Science in the same thing, Applied Animal Biology, which is a research-based master's program. And I'm running an experiment looking at humane pest control management of pigeons at TransLink SkyTrain stations currently. Yeah, so that's just a little bit about me, and I'll let Cheryl take over next.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Cheryl, and I just got my Bachelor of Science in Food Nutrition and Health this May. And I'm currently a master's student at Souder. And I'm studying business analytics, which is about like data management and data analysis, which includes like lots of like programming skills. And yeah, I think like big data is a big trend, so that's why I applied for this program.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jenny Tian. So I did my bachelor's in food science at McGill University. And then I did my master's in Master of Science with a specialization in food science at UBC. So I completed that in 2017. Currently, I work in the grocery industry here in Ontario, where I'm originally from, as a product developer for Loblaws company.
Thank you. So next up, we have a few questions prepared for our panelists to just get the conversation started. So question one would be, what were some barriers that you wish you knew in undergrad before applying to your graduate program?
Should I start again? Go in the same order?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
should we go in the same order?
Okay, so I originally I was also interested in veterinary school. So research-based masters in veterinary school, there was kind of two different barriers that I found with them. Veterinary school absolutely was GPA. It's a very standardized method of allowing applicants into the school. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but in Canada, there is one for BC residents in Saskatchewan, and it's quite competitive to get into. In terms of my master's that is research-based, the biggest barrier by far was funding. This will change with different programs, but for the program that I'm admitted to, you need to have your funding ready before you even apply. They will not look at your application if you do not have funding beforehand. So definitely figuring that out before you get your application started.
Sure. Should I start? So
Yes, please. Sorry, I was muted.
yeah, so my current master program is in business analytics, which includes lots of programming and statistic backgrounds, as I mentioned before. And being a undergraduate student in LFS, I did not have much background in that before I knew that I was going to apply for this program. And I know that I won't get into the program without any programming background. So I started to learn programming languages like Python and R by myself. And I think this background really helped when I was applying. And yeah, this master program requires intermediate skill and Excel as well. So I would say that if you're interested in this program, just have some experience in programming Excel before applying. And I suggest that just look for the requirement as soon as possible so you can better prepare yourself before applying.
This is how.
So I'll take over from here. So I guess my experience with applying for grad school is a little different because from my undergrad to master's, it was a fairly smooth transition as it was in a very similar field. And I knew my professor ahead of time, actually from high school. So I had no problem with choosing the topic or what I wanted to do. But I think it was more for me at the time. I think because I knew that this is what I wanted to do, I didn't consider anything else. So I think one of my recommendations to have is to just keep an open mind and see what else is out there, to really do the research and understand what are the possibilities versus just having your headset into one program. And also understand what best courses you can take as electives when you are in undergrad, which can prepare you for grad studies. So for me personally, I didn't do a lot of stats in my undergrad or grad studies, but I know for some of my friends in similar programs where they needed to do a lot more stats. So I think if I had more knowledge from a statistics perspective, that could be potentially helpful. And also about looking to understand what else you can do during your grad program in addition just doing research or courses. Like if there's any way you can have certain involvements or have certifications that will kind of help you along the way throughout your study or after, I think it will be really helpful. So I guess at the end of the day, when you're in your undergrad, just trying to find out as much as you can about your grad studies program and envision what you want to do after grad studies, so you can kind of work backwards to see what else you need to get there.
Okay, thank you. Next up, we have question 2. So what to look for in applicants, things like GPA, experience, recommendation letter? Should we start with Jenny this time?
Sure, I can go first. I think what you have there is very important. Like for GPA, yes, every school requires a minimum GPA. And I mean, the higher your GPA is, it does gives you a better chance. So that is important. So make sure you maintain that. Experience can be important, especially if you're doing a research master's studies. Like some professor will require you to have some sort of wet lab skills so that you have the basis and show that how you can learn. Recommendation letters would usually be part of the application package. And I think Danielle mentioned a really good point in talking to your professors before you apply to understand like the topic that they can offer, what you're interested in. And I think that's what grad study or professors or programs are really looking for as well. They want to see you're taking the initiatives in finding out what you want to learn. They want to know that you're someone who is asking the right questions and trying to do what you need to do to get to where you want to be. Like grad school is a long time commitment. So you really have to make sure that you're committed in doing so to apply and to do well in it.
Thank you. And what do you think, Cheryl?
And for my program, they only see your grades for third and fourth year courses, which probably is a good news for some of you. And I don't remember the minimum grade for entry, but on the safe side, I would say aim for an average about around 85%. And their website mentioned that this program do not need work experience, but like, again, just on the safe side, it's always to have like some kind of experience before applying, because most of people in my cohort has like so much experience and like yeah, they're like they have so much experience in like big companies. So yeah, and I was applying, they need at least 2 recommendation letters. At least one is academic, which is from professors. I had one from a professor, one from my professors, and 2 from my previous employers. I'm not sure if they changed this year, but yeah. And for the interview, I think they really look into your plan after graduation and why you think this graduate program can help you achieve your career goal. And yeah, this is quite a competitive program, so I would say just prepare like beforehand.
Thank you. And Nadia, what do you think about this?
So I'll leave vet school out of this. I never actually ended up applying to vet school, but I have a ton of information about how to do that if that's something that you're curious about, because it was originally what I wanted to do. But so for the master's I'm in now, it's in the animal welfare program of LFS. It's a very unique, intimate, small, community-oriented program. So the process is a little bit different. So I had a lot of connections with professors and members of the program. And what they're really looking for is someone who can fit in, someone who enjoys the community, someone who is able to work on things by themselves, because you're in charge of this huge research project that you're mostly tasked with performing by yourself with the help of your supervisor, but you're really in charge of the timelines and how things get done. So when I was originally interviewed, the questions really centered around like, do you have the resilience to kind of deal with like these incredibly daunting deadlines and a huge amount of work? Before then, are you able to manage that? Are you able to set boundaries for yourself? Are you able to work independently and structure your time appropriately? So this was a little bit different in that there wasn't so much emphasis on GPA or grades, but really like my past experiences with working on research projects, people who could speak to my abilities and how I work, and then making sure that I was able to kind of have the self-reliance to run the project by myself.
Thank you. I see a question already coming in. So Maria asked for experience, would you say professional experience is more helpful than volunteer experience for when applying, or is any experience okay? Let's just have Jenny, do you want to?
Sure. I think any experience is fine because experience is experience. You don't really need a title in terms of what experience is. I think right out of school, it might be the easiest to get volunteer experience because there's no commitment from a paying aspect. But if you can get professional experience, that's great too.
Okay, thank you much. And we'll go for the next question. So what are some tips or advices for students that are planning to apply to grad school? How about we start from Cheryl this time?
Sure. So I would say definitely connect with your professors as soon as possible. I mean, there's no way like to ask a professor for a recommendation letter, like if he doesn't even know who you are. And I think you can connect with him like by going to office hours and like asking lots of questions. In my opinion, like grades are not the only criteria that prof decide like refer you or not. I think it's more about like the attitude and your passion to learn. And I would say that talk to your professors about the recommendation letter as soon as possible, because like they need time to prepare and write a recommendation letter. And like, or just in case the professor changed their mind, you have like some other professors to back up. Yeah, that's my biggest tips for recommendation letter.
Thank you. And what do you think, Nadia?
Yeah, definitely off of what Cheryl said, I would say connections are super important. And speaking a bit to the volunteer part, I had a really easy time getting in because I did volunteer work for a person who ended up having this project to give me later on. Although I'd worked in the field, that was the most important connection to getting me here quite easily. And also just, you know, finding out, is there funding you want to apply for? If it's research-based, usually that'll happen once annually, maybe twice. So you need to consider those timeframes before applying. So just really being like looking for everything you need to have ahead of time, planning ahead. It's okay if you don't go to graduate school right after undergrad. I didn't, it worked out fine. And also setting clear boundaries for yourself. So you might just wanting to be getting into graduate school, but how is this actually helping you? Not taking on extra projects people are asking you to do just because you want to please them, and making sure that like your needs and your boundaries with your work come first when preparing to undertake graduate school.
Thank you. And Jenny?
Yeah, so I'm going to echo what Nadia and Cheryl just said. I do agree quite 100% on both of their feedback. I do want to emphasize also to like talk to your profs and talk to the grad students who are like, for example, if you're doing a research project in the labs that you're interested in, because you really get the best information from them as they're going through it, and just talk to them to see their experience, what they like about it, what they don't like about it, and see if that's the right fit for you. Because often your research project is one thing, but also the culture in the lab and the actual type of work is another thing. You just really need to make sure that it's the right fit for you as a whole package, because it is a long time commitment and you're really living in the lab all the time. Or like your grad program is your life for the couple of years that you're in it. And also in addition to that, I think my other advice, like what the guest speaker mentioned, also Nadia, is like it's okay to take time off between your undergrad and grad studies. I too did the same thing. So I took a year off and I worked and I traveled, and then going back to grad studies, I think it was super refreshing, because I think at the end of undergrad, the 4 years, I felt burnt out personally. And then just going back to grad school after taking some time off, it was a really different perspective. So that was really helpful as well.
Okay. Thank you so much, Nadia, Cheryl, and Jenny, for sharing your stories and insights. I think now we'll have a short Q&A session to clear any doubt you have at this point. So please feel free to type it in the chat, or if you're comfortable enough, you can send it. If not comfortable, you can send it through private message. Oh wait. We also had some questions from students, collected from students that was sent from the email yesterday. So one question for the panelists was, do you have any idea before you even apply? I'm not muted, wait. Actually, let me share the Google Doc. No, I shouldn't share the wait. Okay, sorry. Cheryl, do you want to talk about it?
Sure. Like what kind of idea? Like the idea of applying for a master program?
Yes.
So I started to have this idea of applying master like really late, like maybe at the end of my third year. No, I mean second year. And then like, because I just realized like the importance of big data, and I like, at the time I was trying to look for jobs, but like I was hopeless. So I didn't get any interviews or any offers. So that's why I wanted to like to start applying, start thinking about applying masters. And yeah, and that's the time when I started learning programming skills as well.
I see.
I'm a pretty bad example. I mean, just prepare earlier.
But it's good that you got it. How much, so I'll go on to the next question. So how much time and effort do students have to put in for grad school in comparison to undergraduate degree? What do you think, Nadia?
So yeah, for my undergraduate degree, I was working the whole time. I would work 16 to 24 hours a week on top of school full time. So it was a lot. But I actually don't think the workload is any different. It's just your mindset, for me anyway, is different. So in undergrad, it felt like because you're juggling so many different courses and your attention is kind of divided between all of these things on top of working, it felt harder to manage in terms of like focus and motivation, because it's like you're being pulled in all these different areas. Whereas this, I have my main research project, I have side research projects, and I'm TAing and doing things on the side as well, but they all are kind of academic and in the same sphere and in the same program, covering the same topics. So although the workload is roughly the same, I would say I find it at least a bit easier to focus. And if you are research based, you do get a stipend, which is kind of like a salary per month to be in school, which relieves a lot of the financial stress and allows you to kind of focus a bit more too. So I am finding it a bit more enjoyable, honestly, just because it's something I'm really passionate about. It's something I like to do, even though the workload technically I wouldn't say is any different. If not, it might be more. You spend a lot of weekends and a lot of evenings working late, but you know, that's what it is. It has a deadline. It's only going to be a couple of years. Yeah.
So it's more about the passion. It's not like.
Hopefully, if that's what it is for you, yes.
Okay. Oh, let me mute myself. Our next question is how much planning does it goes into developing your thesis for a thesis-based master's? Who did wait?
Is that
I'm
a
not
question
sure.
for me?
Oh yeah, Jenny.
Did you do thesis-based master's?
I did do thesis. Yeah, I
Okay.
can speak on that.
Yes.
So I'm just trying to think how I answered this. Well, usually like you would, so when you first enter your grad study program, like you don't plan and write your thesis in one day, no. So in the beginning of it, you have a discussion with your professor to understand the direction. And then together you write a proposal for your thesis. And this is reviewed by your committee. So basically you come up with a outline on your research study, and this is discussed with your professor, and then your committee would approve that. And then there's usually like an introductory seminar, I believe, so you let everyone know what you're focusing on, and they can give you feedback, and then which can be incorporated into your plan. And then that plan can be a time-based plan of where, like how many months you want to decide to focus on each of the stage. And then eventually you'll be able to complete that as based on how long your study is and what you're proposing. So I guess the more details that you have in the beginning, the smoother it could be, because it's more structured, but it do expect changes here and there throughout your thesis-based masters, if that's what you're doing, because you never know how your research could turn out. So I would say in the beginning, you need to put something down, but it could change, and it's on an ongoing basis.
Okay, thank you much. Are there any more questions? Please feel free to type in the chat. I'll wait for like a bit for people to type in their questions.
Can I just ask my question out loud?
Oh yeah, of course, go ahead.
For Cheryl specifically, so I guess because you did your bachelor's, you got it in food nutrition and health, if I'm not mistaken, and now you're in solder. And I was just wondering what got you to change in directions, or how do you plan on implementing those two disciplines in the future? What was kind of your thought process in terms of also when you're going to apply for jobs? What was your thought process?
I think this is really good questions. Like when I was doing my FNH, like as I mentioned before, I had no idea like I am going to master when I'm in my first or second year. But this might actually like, I'm sorry, I'm kind of nervous, so I lost my thoughts. Like okay, when I started to look for jobs, and then like I realized that like food nutrition and health is really narrow. And I also did a minor in during my undergrad in Southern. I did a minor in commerce, and I started to become very interested in commerce, and I feel like big data and data analysis is actually the future of the road. So yeah, I just go for it then. And I wanted to combine like food, nutrition, and data in my future career, like in a digital marketing. So yeah, that's basically why I wanted to apply for this program.
Thank you.
Since Gilly just asked this question out loud, can I ask my question out loud as well? This is for Jenny. So I was wondering how your master's, because I think you finished your master's already. And
yes, I did.
Yeah, so I was wondering how your master's helped you get your current job at the moment, because it's at Loblaws, and that's a pretty major company. And I was wondering what kind of skills or experience really helped you in terms of your application to that job, and like how you're applying the skills and experience you gained from your master's in your current job.
Yeah, for sure. So I can elaborate a bit more on that, and my answer might actually shock you a bit. So just backtrack for a second. So after my undergrad, so actually during my undergrad, every year I worked in the lab in the summer, because I at first thought I wanted to be in the academia and do my PhD, etc. But then after I worked in the lab for so many years, I wasn't really sure that's something I wanted to do. So in my last year of my undergrad, I took on a summer opportunity with Canada Bread at the time, which is now known as Bimbo Canada. So they were a commercial bakery. So I had some industry experience, and I loved it. And I thought maybe I need to go into the industry after my graduate studies. And then after I took a year off before going into graduate studies, and then I worked in Germany in a marketing team where they also did some food analysis, trends and market information. And then I realized being in front of a computer is not for me all day. And then I entered my graduate studies. During my graduate studies, it was a thesis-based master's, but it doesn't need to restrict you from just doing research all the time. I would strongly recommend that if you want to go into the industry and work for a manufacturer or for the grocery business, when you're in grad school, try to volunteer or like be part of projects or conference that you can, either locally or anything virtual that we have these days. So during my graduate studies, I chaired the Canadian Institute of Food Science and Technology Conference, which happened to be in Vancouver that year. But you can find a lot of similar opportunities in the local area or online. Like if you're in food science, there's IFT, which they have a very strong student section, and then BC has a section, BCFT. So really get involved and make your connections and make your network in terms of what you can do down the road in the industry, and then keep in touch with those people and ask them questions. If you see a role that really interests you, Google them on LinkedIn, ask them questions, how they got there, ask for their experience, ask them if there are any ways that they can bring you into the industry in terms of finding your first job. Just really be curious and see if there's any way that anyone can help you, and try to direct you in the right direction. So after I graduated, it's only been 3 years, but this is actually my third job. So in my first full-time position, I was a product developer for Parmalat Canada, which is now known as Lactalis. So they are a dairy company. And after working there for a year in product development, I realized the culture and the pace of the work wasn't the right fit for me. It was too slow versus I needed to be extremely busy and learning something new all the time. And in landing on that position, it was through the conference that I was volunteering at. And then I happened to meet a gentleman who was with the company, and he made a connection for me. So I think talking to the right people and then just keep in touch is really important. And then midway through that position, I went back to the commercial bakery that I did my internship at. And again, it was through connections. And they happened to have a position there that was opening, and I liked my experience back then when I was a summer student. So then I went back and I was there for about 1.5 years, and quickly I realized the culture did change and it was no longer something I wanted to do. And then I landed on my current job really by chance, as there was an opening and I knew someone who was working for the company at the time. And then they told me that I should apply just to try it out. I wasn't really interested because when I applied, I didn't feel my qualifications were a fit for the position, meaning that I felt I was too junior for the position. But they encouraged me to apply anyway, and I did. And here I am. I've been here for almost 2 years and really happy in this position. So I think what I'm trying to get at is really go out there and make your networks and talk to different people and ask the question and keep those connections ongoing. And if there's any opportunity for them to help you, either if it's volunteering or an internship or even an entry position, get on it if you're interested. Never be afraid that you don't feel you're qualified in something, because the only thing you can do is try. And if you fail, that's okay, because you can try again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your wonderful insights. With that, I think today's event is coming to an end. I hope you all had the chance to get your question answered and connect with amazing panelists. Before we're closing out, oh, by the way, Michelle is going to share the LinkedIn, the links to their panelists' LinkedIn in the chat. So if you have any more questions, you can connect with them. And also, before we close, I'll just find the slides. I'd also like to announce that ACE team is hosting a workshop on November 27th called Ace Your Way Through Final Seasons. In this event, you will be able to hear from our guest speaker from UBC Wellness Center and student leaders to discover effective study methods and help identify your stress. For more details, please go to our website and feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. Having said all these, we just have a few minutes left to complete the exit survey. If y'all could click on the link, send in a chat with Michelle, and give us your thoughts on the event, it'll be great. With that, I'd like to conclude today's session. I'd like to say thank you to Danielle for being a guest speaker at our event. And thank you to Nadia, Cheryl, and Jenny for being wonderful panelists. This event would not be possible without you. And thank you so much to those who came to our event today. I hope this event was helpful to you and that you're able to learn something more about grad school. Thank you as well to all the colleagues in LFS ACE Events Committee, which allowed this event to take place. Best of luck to everyone in the upcoming term, and take care.